Australia's decision to pull out of a submarine deal with France is threatening to cause rifts between the US, UK and their European allies. Canberra has ditched a 2016 deal to build submarines with Paris in favour of a new defence pact with Washington and London. The French government has accused the three of deceit and backstabbing, and any retaliation could jeopardise billions of dollars in trade between Australia and Europe. Mobin Nasir reports.
Patrolling the vast expanse of ocean around Australia, these submarines are the country's first line of defence. But the diesel-electric vessels are no match for China's nuclear subs, and Beijing's rising naval dominance is driving Canberra to modernise its fleet. Under a new security agreement with the US and the UK dubbed AUKUS, Australia will receive cruise missiles and nuclear submarines.
We intend to build these submarines in Adelaide, Australia, in close cooperation with the United Kingdom and the United States.
But the announcement has shocked France, which had a similar deal in place.
There have been lies, there's been duplicity, there's been a major break of trust. There has been contempt, so it's not going well between us. Not at all. There is a crisis.
In 2016, Australia agreed to buy 12 new diesel-electric submarines from France to replace its existing fleet, which is scheduled to be retired in 2036. Building these vessels was expected to generate $66 billion in revenues for France's defence sector and generate thousands of jobs. But with the new so-called AUKUS agreement, Canberra has scrapped its plans with Paris. EU leaders are also raising the alarm. They say Australia's defence pact with the US and the UK ignores Europe's interests in the Indo-Pacific region.
During the discussion, the ministers expressed a clear solidarity toward France, and this announcement ran counter to call for greater cooperation with the European Union in the Indo-Pacific.
In retaliation, France has recalled its ambassadors from the US and Australia, delayed defence talks with the UK, and is threatening to block trade between the EU and Australia. Canberra says it's opting for newer technology that better serves its defence needs. Along with the US and the UK, it's downplaying French opposition to the deal.
We'll be talking to all our friends about how to make the AUKUS pact work so that it's not exclusionary, it's not divisive, and it really doesn't have to be that way. This is just a way of the UK, the US and Australia sharing certain technologies because that is the sensible thing to do.
But while flaring tempers may subside, analysts say friction between Europe and its allies is likely to persist.
A broader reflection must be carried out, which comes simply from the fact that the security interests of the Americans are not strictly identical to those of the Europeans. And because their security interests take precedence, they won't listen to the Europeans if the security interests diverge. American unilateralism is not linked to the President of the United States. It's linked to the fact that there is a kind of continental drift between Europe and the US.
The financial blow to France's defence sector is water under the bridge. But if Paris makes good on its threat to retaliate, economic ties with some of its allies may also be in hot water. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
Well, for more on this, Elisabeth Braw joins us now from London. She's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Good to have you back on the program, Elisabeth. The French are clearly furious about this new AUKUS deal, but apart from the fact that Australia essentially has teared up a $66 billion submarine deal, France says it's particularly angry with the United States for holding talks over this new alliance in secret. Is France's fury justified?
Well, it's never nice to be left out of conversations that then turn out to not to have been in your favor. But France, we should remember, is not a shrinking violet when it comes to exporting defense equipment. It uses some pretty rough tactics itself when it sells or when it tries to sell its defense equipment to other countries, to the disadvantage of its allies. So France really doesn't have much it can't count on much sympathy from its allies. And yes, there have been vague expressions of support from the European Commission, but very little we should note from its fellow EU member states, simply because they have themselves, in many cases, been the subject of French arrogance and French power play.
But this AUKUS alliance isn't just about a commercial deal involving French-built submarines, is it? It's more about the strategic alliance, about curtailing China's influence in the Indo-Pacific region. Why is AUKUS so important?
This is, I think, that the fundamental point here is it's about Australia, it's about China, it's not about France. So what Australia decided after having entered into these negotiations and the final stages of acquiring French submarines was that those submarines were no longer fit for the purpose that Australia needed submarines for, which is to keep itself safe from Australia. And that is what has changed. China has become a lot more assertive, a lot more aggressive in the years since Australia began negotiating with France about those submarines. And Australia, as a result, needs different submarines, more sophisticated, more advanced, more powerful submarines that can stay in the water for longer. So it's not about France, it's what Australia needs to stay safe.
But it is important to clear up that these submarines are nuclear powered and won't be nuclear armed. But according to some people, including in Southeast Asia, it pretty much is a slippery slope towards nuclear weapons. That's the biggest fear in the region, that nuclear powered subs could eventually lead to nuclear arms. Is that a justified fear?
No. So by the same logic, we would say that any country that has nuclear power plants could develop nuclear weapons, and that's clearly not a fear that is relevant in most cases. Most of our countries have nuclear power plants, and nobody's worried that we're trying to develop in nuclear weapons. I think the big shake-up or the big wake-up call here is that somebody has decided to publicly acknowledge that China is a threat and take action about it. And of course, China is acting very offended, but that was to be expected. I think that the French reaction is maybe a bit surprising, considering that it's really not about trying to hurt France. It's about Australia looking after its own interests and deciding that France was not the right partner with whom to do that.
Okay, Elisabeth Braw from the American Enterprise Institute. We'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much again for joining us on Money Talks.